Look at your shadow right now. It's there, isn't it? You can see it clearly. It has a shape, a size. It moves when you move. It seems real, tangible, almost like a physical thing. But here's a question that will unravel your understanding of reality. Does your shadow have weight? Your immediate answer is probably no. Of course not. It's just a shadow. But if I push you further and ask why it has no weight, could you explain it? Could you tell me what a shadow actually is? I'm Richard Feynman, and I've spent my life asking simple questions that lead to profound answers. And this question, why does your shadow have no weight, will take us on a journey through the nature of light, matter, energy, and reality itself. By the time we're done, you'll understand something fundamental about the universe that most people never grasp. Most of what you think is real is actually absence. Most of what you see is defined not by what's there, but by what's not there. This isn't philosophy. This is physics. And it's beautiful. Let me start with the most basic question. What is a shadow? You might say, a shadow is the dark area that appears when something blocks light. And you'd be right, but let's be more precise. A shadow is not a thing. It's the absence of a thing. Specifically, it's the absence of photons. Light travels from a source, the sun, a lamp, a candle, outward in all directions. When this light encounters your body absorbs or reflects most of the photons. The photons that would have continued in a straight line to the ground behind you are blocked. That region behind you receives fewer photons than the surrounding area. That's all a shadow is. It's not a substance. It's not an entity. It's a region where something that was traveling has been prevented from arriving. And this is why a shadow has no weight. You cannot weigh an absence. You cannot measure the mass of something that isn't there. But let's go deeper, because this simple answer opens up questions that will bend your mind. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Feynman, a shadow is just missing light. Light has no mass, so of course the shadow has no weight. Simple. But hold on. Let's examine what light actually is, because it's stranger than you think. Light is electromagnetic radiation, oscillating electric and magnetic fields propagating through space at 299,792,458 meters per second. According to Einstein's special relativity, anything traveling at the speed of light must have zero rest mass, so photons, the particles of light, have no mass. If you could put a photon on a scale, which you can't, because it's always moving at light speed, it would weigh nothing. But here's something beautiful and strange. Even though photons have no mass, they do carry momentum and energy. How is that possible? How can something with no mass carry momentum when we learn in school that momentum equals mass times velocity? The answer lies in Einstein's famous equation, E = mc. But that's actually a special case of a more general equation, E dug memsic plus pc, where p is momentum and c is the speed of light. For a photon with zero mass, this simplifies to E dug pc. Photons carry momentum proportional to their energy, even though they have no mass. This isn't just theoretical. When sunlight hits a surface, it exerts pressure, radiation pressure. It's incredibly tiny, but it's real and measurable. Solar sails for spacecraft work on this principle. Light is pushing on you right now, very gently. So when you block light and create a shadow, you're not just blocking something weightless, you're blocking something that carries energy and momentum. You're creating an absence of energy, an absence of momentum transfer. Your shadow is a region where momentum and energy that should have arrived didn't arrive. Now let's think about what a shadow tells us. This is where things get philosophically interesting. When you look at a shadow, you can determine information. There's an object blocking the light. You can often determine the shape of that object, its approximate size, sometimes even identify what it is. But here's the paradox. A shadow carries information, yet it's literally nothing. How can nothing carry information? The answer is subtle. The shadow itself doesn't carry information. It's the pattern of light and dark, the boundary between presence and absence, that carries information. Information theory, developed by Claude Shannon, tells us that information is fundamentally about reducing uncertainty. When you see a shadow, you gain information because the presence of the shadow reduces your uncertainty about what's between the light source and the surface. But the shadow achieves this not by being something, but by creating contrast. It's the difference between the lit area and the shadowed area that contains information. This is a profound principle. Information can be encoded in absence as effectively as in presence. Think about this. When you read text on a screen, you're reading the presence of light against the absence of light, or vice versa. The meaning exists in the pattern, in the relationship between what's there and what's not. In digital information, we use ones and zeros. The zero is just as important as the one. Absence carries as much information as presence. Your shadow is information encoded in absence. Here's a question that seems silly but leads somewhere interesting. Can you touch a shadow? Try it. Put your hand into a shadow. Did you touch the shadow? Your hand is now in the dark area, occupying the same space as the shadow. But did you make contact with the shadow itself? The answer is no, because there's nothing there to touch. A shadow has no substance, no material existence. It cannot be touched because it's not a physical entity. But here's what's fascinating. When you put your hand in the shadow, you're now blocking the light yourself. You've become part of the system creating the shadow. You're not touching the shadow. You're participating in the absence. This relates to a deep question in physics. What is real? We tend to think that only physical things, things made of matter and energy, are real. But shadows affect how we perceive the world. They carry information. They influence our behavior. If you see a shadow approaching you quickly, you might duck, thinking something's about to hit you. Shadows have causal effects on the world, even though they're not made of anything. They're real in their effects, even though they're not real in their substance. This is similar to other absences in physics that have profound effects. The vacuum of space, which isn't truly empty, but seethes with quantum fluctuations. The absence of particles, called holes in semiconductor physics, which behave like positive charges, even though they're absences of negative charges. Physics is full of important absences, places where our theories describe what's not there as powerfully as what is. Now let me blow your mind with something that seems impossible. Imagine you're holding a laser pointer. You point it at the moon, which is about 384,000 kilometers away. Now you flick your wrist quickly, sweeping the laser dot across the moon's surface. How fast did that dot move across the moon? Let's say you rotated your wrist 10 degrees in 1 second. The arc length the dot travels is roughly 67,000 kilometers in 1 second. That's about 22% of the speed of light. Extremely fast, but still slower than light speed. But now imagine you're pointing at something much farther away. A surface that's light years away. With the same wrist motion, the dot would sweep across that distant surface faster than the speed of light. Much faster. And here's the kicker. A shadow can move faster than light. Much faster. And this doesn't violate relativity. How is this possible? Because the shadow isn't a thing. It's not an object traveling from one location to another. It's a pattern of absence that appears at different locations. Think of it like this. Imagine a row of light bulbs stretching to the horizon. Now imagine turning them off in sequence, left to right, very quickly. The wave of darkness moving down the line could appear to travel at any speed, even faster than light, but no information is actually traveling. Each bulb is being independently turned off in sequence. Similarly, when a shadow moves, no thing is traveling from the old shadow location to the new shadow location. The old absence disappears, and a new absence appears elsewhere. The absence itself doesn't travel, it just appears and disappears in different places. This reveals something profound. Speed limits in physics apply to things, to matter, energy, and information. They don't apply to patterns of absence. You can't use a faster-than-light shadow to send information faster than light because the shadow isn't carrying anything. It's just the consequence of other things that are all traveling at or below light speed. Now let's venture into quantum mechanics, where shadows become even stranger. At the quantum level, particles don't have definite positions until they're measured. They exist in superpositions, clouds of probability. An electron isn't here or there, it's in a quantum state encompassing multiple possibilities. So, what happens when you try to create a shadow at the quantum level? Imagine shining light through a barrier with two slits onto a screen behind it. The areas blocked by the barrier create shadows, or do they? In the famous double-slit experiment, something bizarre happens. Even when you send photons through one at a time, an interference pattern gradually builds up on the screen. A pattern of light and dark bands. The dark bands are places where photons are somehow prevented from arriving, even though there's nothing physically blocking them. They're quantum shadows, regions where the probability of photon arrival goes to zero due to destructive interference of the quantum wave function. But here's what's mind-bending. These quantum shadows are caused by interference between different probability amplitudes, different possible paths the photon could have taken. A photon passing through the left slit has a probability amplitude. A photon passing through the right slit has a probability amplitude. These amplitudes can interfere destructively at certain points, meaning the probabilities subtract rather than add. At those points, the photon has zero probability of arriving. It's a shadow created not by blocking light, but by the mathematical structure of quantum mechanics. At the quantum level, shadows can appear where nothing is blocking the light. They emerge from the interference of possibilities. This connects to the uncertainty principle in a subtle way. The very act of determining which path a photon took destroys the interference pattern. The quantum shadows exist only when you don't know which path was taken. Observation changes whether shadows appear. Quantum shadows are absences that depend on absence of information. Let's step back and think about what all of this means philosophically. We live in a culture that privileges presence over absence. We think about what exists, not about what doesn't exist. We study things, not the spaces between things. But physics teaches us that absence is just as important as presence. Empty space is just as real as filled space. Darkness is just as significant as light. In fact, most of the universe is absence. The space between atoms is vastly larger than the atoms themselves. If an atom were the size of a football stadium, the nucleus would be a marble at the center, and the electrons would be tiny specks orbiting at the stadium's edge. Everything in between is empty space. Your body is 99.999999% empty space. You are mostly absence, held together by electromagnetic forces. And yet we define ourselves by what's there, not by what's not there. We think of ourselves as solid, substantial, when we're mostly void. Shadows remind us that what's not there shapes our reality just as much as what is there. Think about a sculpture. A sculptor doesn't just add material, they remove it. The statue emerges from the absence of stone. The art exists in what's been taken away as much as in what remains. Think about music. Silence is not the absence of music, it's part of the music. The rests between notes, the pauses between phrases, these absences are what give music its rhythm, its emotional power. Think about meaning in language. Words mean something not just by what they include, but by what they exclude. When I say chair, I'm excluding everything that isn't a chair. The meaning exists in the boundary between what is and what isn't. Shadows are a physical manifestation of a deeper truth. Reality is defined by relationships between presence and absence, not by presence alone. Now let me connect shadows to one of the deepest principles in physics, entropy and the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy is often described as disorder, but more precisely, it's a measure of the number of possible microscopic states consistent with a macroscopic observation. A shadow is a macroscopic pattern, an organized absence of light in a particular shape. To maintain this pattern requires energy. It requires an ongoing light source, an ongoing obstacle blocking the light. The moment you remove the light source or the obstacle, the shadow disappears. The pattern dissolves into uniformity. This is entropy at work. Organized patterns naturally decay into uniform distributions. But here's what's interesting. The shadow itself doesn't increase entropy. In fact, from an information theory perspective, the presence of shadows decreases entropy by adding structure and information to the light distribution. A perfectly uniform light field has high entropy. All states are equivalent, no information. But a light field with shadows has structure, pattern, information, lower entropy. Yet maintaining this lower entropy state requires energy input. The sun must keep shining. The obstacle must remain in place. This is what living systems do. We maintain low entropy internal states by consuming energy and expelling high entropy waste. You are like a shadow in reverse, a persistent pattern of presence in a universe tending toward absence, maintained only by constant energy flow. Let me bring all of this together into one final, mind-bending insight. You asked why your shadow has no weight. The simple answer is, because it's absence, and absence has no mass. But the deeper answer is this. Your shadow reveals the fundamental nature of reality, that what we perceive as things are actually patterns of presence and absence, that information can be encoded in what's not there, that the universe is built as much from voids as from substance. Your shadow is a mirror image of you, made of nothing, yet carrying your shape. It's a perfect metaphor for so much of existence. Your thoughts are patterns of electrical activity and absence in your brain, neurons firing and not firing in specific patterns. Your identity is defined as much by what you're not as by what you are. The choices you didn't make, the paths you didn't take, the person you're not. Your consciousness itself might be understood as a kind of shadow, an absence of unconsciousness, a pattern that emerges from the vast darkness of unawareness. The universe started from nothing, or at least from a quantum vacuum state that's not quite nothing but close. Everything that exists emerged from absence, and will eventually return to absence as entropy increases toward maximum. We are temporary patterns of presence in an eternal ocean of absence. We are shadows cast by the brief flash of the Big Bang onto the screen of space-time. So, why does your shadow have no weight? Because it's nothing. But it's a very special kind of nothing, an organized, information-carrying, causally effective nothing. It's a reminder that the universe is stranger than common sense suggests, that absence can be as important as presence, that patterns matter more than substance, that what's not there shapes reality as profoundly as what is there. The next time you see your shadow, don't dismiss it as just a shadow. See it as what it really is. A precise demonstration of the relationship between light and matter. A visible absence that reveals the presence of your body. a pattern of darkness that contains information about your shape. See it as evidence that the universe operates on principles deeper than simple presence and absence, that reality emerges from the dance between what is and what isn't. Your shadow has no weight because it's nothing. But that nothing is teaching you something profound about everything. And that, I think, is beautiful. Thank you. Now go out into the sunlight and contemplate the profound nothingness of your shadow. It weighs nothing, but it carries meaning. And sometimes, that's all that matters.